Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the second chapter in the book of Job. It, together with the first chapter, collectively form the prologue of the book of Job, which is distinct from the main body. Chapters 3 through 41 are written in poetry, whereas the prologue and the epilogue, the 42nd and final chapter is the epilogue, are written in prose. And without the foundation of the context that is established in the first two chapters, the poetic musings that proliferate the majority of the book of Job would be beautiful, but they would not make sense. So this is foundationally essential, these two chapters, to what we read and what comes after it. It opens and introduces with the human protagonist, the namesake of the book. Verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and straight, and one who feared Elohim and turned aside from evil. There really was a man named Job. Job is fact, it is not fiction. His historicity is attested to by Ezekiel and James, and this Job is not to be confused with the descendant of Zebulun, one of the 70 original Hebrew people to travail down to Egypt in Genesis 46:13. But Job is a name which translates as hated, and initially he loves God and God loves him, yet God sends him a tremendous amount of suffering, or Satan does rather, but God lets it happen. So the names do have meanings in the Bible, but the main point of the introductory verse is just the character description, his report card. He measures quite well, quite excellent. He is an exemplar of virtue, piety, and righteousness, those adjectives that describe him. Perfect and straight. Now, perfect does not mean that he was sinless. Job denies that he was sinless in some of his discourses. Straight just means upright. He had integrity. He feared Elohim and turned aside from evil. Now, the book of Job belongs in the genre of Old Testament wisdom literature in the 28th chapter, 28th verse, which is written by the author of Job. Job is the main character, but he did not write the book, because there's no way that none of the humans know what take place in the first two chapters. So their struggle to make sense, we are able to make sense in ways that they are not, because we know things that they do not. But Job 28:28. Turning aside from evil is the foundation, is connected to understanding, and fear of Elohim is connected to wisdom. This is the axiomatic assumption of wisdom literature, that true wisdom exists and is found in the fear of the Almighty. But one of the blessings and benefits and consequences of having wisdom is to resist temptation and to turn aside from evil, to not overcome evil, but overcome it. Job also had 7 sons, 3 daughters, tremendous possessions. He had family. He had all the signs of blessings in the ancient world that would have been attributed to being beloved by God. He had so much agricultural animals. His wealth was, he lived in a pre-money society, so his wealth is measured in the number of farm animals he had. But it is also written in the third verse that he is the greatest of all the people in the East. So he had power, he had prestige, he had reputation, he had renown. He was a man renowned for his piety and his wisdom, and also his righteousness. And so fastidiously circumspect as is now these children of his, they are in the practice of congregating in their homes to party. But Job is so fastidiously circumspect that he offers sacrifices. Job lives before and outside the covenant nation. So before the institution of the priesthood, there would have been family priest, and Job served in this capacity. He was his family priest, and he sacrificed for his children. This Job did always, in the off chance that they had cursed him in their hearts while they were partying. Then the scene transitions from earth to heaven in verses 6 through 8, which are all but verbatim, not exactly identical, but very close to the first three verses of the chapter we're going to cover today. So we're just going to paraphrase them. The thing we learn is that Satan has heavenly access. He's up there in the presence of God with the angels and perhaps with his angels. And God asks, where does he come from? And he's been scouring about to and fro the earth. The earth is his domain. The earth is his territory. He is the God of the world. 2 Corinthians 4:4. That's the only title that is used, that Jesus used outside of his heavenly Father, was for Satan. Or actually, Paul wrote it. Sorry, that was an error. But he's diligently searching the earth. Satan is not lazy. He is motivated. He is driven. He is determined. He is strategic. He is subtle. He is a dangerous and cunning foe. And we read of much of his devices. So part of wisdom, remember, Job belongs in wisdom category, is the awareness of Satan's inexistence, and even more important, an awareness of his strategies, tactics, and deceptions, of which we read of in some of this. But God points with pride to his servant Job, as you know, Satan. You don't have to go very far. The world is literally subsumed with wickedness at all times in all places. But you know, there's this one person, Job, that God points to pride to. Verse 9, and Satan answered Yahweh and said, is Job fearing Elohim for naught? So is there any meaning or substance to his piety, because he had all these possessions? So Satan's argument, which we read more fully in the 10th verse, have you not made a hedge around him and around his household and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hand, and his possessions have increased in the land. Piety and prosperity are closely connected in the covenantal system of rewards and punishments, but this is, you know, life is far too complex to reduce it to such. Socioeconomic realities are far too complex to reduce it to anything so simplistic. But the nature of his argument, Satan is the accuser. He is accusing God of being unworthy of worship. He is accusing him of having to pay people to worship him. And he's also accusing Job of using religion would be reduced to a species of selfishness if we were rewarded temporarily in response to our righteousness. Religion is having faith when he takes it all away, and this Job does at the conclusion of this chapter. Verse 11, but stretch out your hand, please, and strike all that he has, and he would not curse you to your face. It's interesting because Satan does have manners. He does say please and thank you. That's not something that is prolific in the vocabulary of his human minions, but we already described him as the accuser. Now he is the tempter. He is tempting God to tempt Job, because the temptation would have been palpable and present to curse God when you have all these things and to lose it all. The hedge is a form of protection. That's what that word means. So take away his security, all his temporal belongings, all his temporal blessings, even his children, himself, and he will curse you to their face. This is the nature of their debate. This is the nature of his challenge. And Yahweh freely consents with one limitation: do not lay a hand on himself. So he gives the other lesson we learn of the devil is that if you give him an inch, he will take a mile, because he goes all the way in rapid fire succession, just one after another. All the Sabaean raiders, the Sabaeans would eventually settle in what corresponds to the modern country of Yemen at the southern Arabian Peninsula. But before they were settled civilized people, they were raiders, nomadic bandits and raiders, as were the Chaldeans, who became the Neo-Babylonian Empire, who conquered Judah and destroyed the temple. But Job is before Israel was even a nation. The Sabaeans, they take all the oxen and the donkeys, and they kill all the servants, and I alone have escaped to inform you. There is a lot of repetition in the prose portion of Job. Remember, verses 6 through 8 in chapter 1 are all but virtually identical to the first 3 of chapter 2. But, I alone have escaped to inform you. So all these things happen. Lightning falls from the sky, wipes out his sheep, all his sheep, and all the servants that were tending to the sheep, and then only one is there. Then the Chaldeans take the camels and kill all the servants, and I alone have escaped to inform you. And the worst thing of all, to add injury to insult, rather, is the loss of his own children. because these monetary his affection for the sheep is nowhere, or all the animals was nowhere near his own flesh and blood. They are gathering and congregating in the firstborn, the eldest of his sons, and then suddenly a great wind sweeps and crushes the physical structure, collapses on them, killing them all at once. So Job is now is no longer a father. He was a father with 10 children. Now he is not a father, and his response is remarkable in light of having it all and losing it in the twinkle of an eye. Verse 20, then Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and did obeisance. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I return there. Yahweh has given, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. In all this Job did not sin, nor ascribe wickedness unto Elohim. So his immediate and instinctive response is to worship. And this is one of the blessings and benefits of pain and suffering, is that we are brought closer to God by leaning on him when we have no one else to lean to. And we will exit the world as we entered, with nothing, and everything that we have or can own or claim on this earth, it really belongs to him, and it is his sovereign jurisdiction to give and to take away. And he doesn't owe us an explanation. These are not arbitrary whims. They may seem to operate on an apparently unjust economy, but his sovereignty is self-evidently just. But he blesses the name of Yahweh. So as far as Job knows, Yahweh is the one who has done this, and that word Yahweh does not appear often. The only other time Job calls him that is in 12:9. He is an Edomite, so that's the covenantal name. El Shaddai is the nomenclature of preference. That term appears some 31 times in all the chapters. But Job does pass the test, the first test, but there's another test. So the second chapter takes off where the first left off. First verse, second chapter left in itself. Again, the day came to be that the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. So the same thing that happened in the 6th verse of the preceding chapter, it happens again. The sons of Elohim are the angels. These are endowed creatures who are superior in strength, superior in spirit, have capacities that go above and beyond. These are intermediaries between heaven and Satan was an angel before Satan was Satan. He was Lucifer, the single greatest angel, outstanding among them in wisdom and beauty. But his great wisdom and his beauty gave him he succumbed to the sin of pride, which launched his rebellion, and he was been irreversibly wicked. So his mission henceforth, he is aligned against, he is antagonistic, he is against everything that God does and wants and is. But he does have heavenly access, and he's there for the same reason that all the other angels are there. They are presenting themselves before Yahweh. Yahweh is the king of heaven. Satan is a king as well. He is the ruler of the kingdom of darkness, and he hates and seeks to destroy all that is pure, all that is true, all that is virtuous, and all that is sacred, and all that is good. And Yahweh said to Satan, from where do you come? And Satan answered Yahweh and said, from diligently searching the earth, and from walking up and down it. Same thing he says in the 7th verse of the preceding chapter. There might be a word or two. I know in the first one he says with them, whereas in the first verse of the 2nd chapter he says among them. So there are verbal nuances. It's not exactly verbatim, but it's so nearly identical in tone and substance. That's why we are only going to read it this one time. He's on his domain, his territory. He is diligently. Satan is not lazy. He is a motivated enemy, and evil never rests. So we must be fastidious in doing good at all times and all places, because Satan is busy. Satan is active. Satan is alive. Satan is alert. Satan is potent. and he wants to bring as many people in the earth down to hell with him. That is his mission. That's why he is walking up and down about it. There is no place on the earth that he does not visit. He is assisted by demons who are the fallen angels who chose to join Lucifer's rebellion against God in heaven. And in Revelation 12:3, we read that he let a third of them down. And in the 5th chapter of the same book, John describes the heavenly vision where there are 100 million angels, which means that there are 50 million demons to assist Satan on the earth at all times. And Yahweh said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a perfect and straight man, one who fears Elohim and turns aside from evil, and he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." Once more, he points with pride to the servant Job. He knows that Satan had quite clearly recently visited Job, but he still points to him again. He passed the test. He heard all the angels and demons in heaven were attentively alert to what was transpiring with Job, because this was a bet between God and Satan, the respective kings of kingdoms that are at war with each other. And but Job is an exemplar of piety. We already described the things he was. This is identical. Much of what we read, we already read in the first verse of the first chapter. But the additional detail, and this is where it is distinct, this additional sentence is not included in the 8th verse of the first chapter. And he holds fast to his integrity. Satan took his wealth, he took his family, and he's about to take his health. But the two things he cannot take is our faith and his integrity. So Job maintains both in spite of losing it all. He holds fast to his integrity in spite of what you just did, in spite of you going to the lengths that you did, the degrees and depths of your destruction were just, doing what you do best. And you incited me to destroy him without cause. So there was a reason to Job's suffering, and the reason is to settle a bet, to give the whole world and posterity a witness that even though the whole world may forsake Yahweh, there is one man living who did not, in spite of losing it all. The extremity of his situation is without precedent or parallel in the human experience. And Satan answered Yahweh and said, "Skin for skin, and all that a man has he would give for his life. Health is the most prized possession. Many elderly, wealthy people would trade in their money for their health now that they are, old, rich, and alone." So Satan, he already took his family, he took his wealth, now he's about to take his health. He's saying, you see he's still flourishing physically, take that away from him, and then he will curse you to your face. But stretch out your hand, please, again, and strike his bone in his flesh, and if he will not curse you to your face. So he's challenging and he's tempting him to reach out to destroy him more thoroughly and more fully and more without cause, unprovoked, unmerited, undeserved. And that then he will finally curse him to his face. But he is, Yahweh is not succumbing to temptation because he already knows the outcome is settled in advance. Job still has to go through the ringer. And he finds out, that there was, he does not give an explanation to the reason of his suffering. The reader is privy to that, but God is also a God of promises and not of explanations. And he does restore the possessions, the amount, the same number of children are born to him once more. And the types of possessions are restored twofold to what they were. In the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter, we read that in the 42nd chapter, the twofold restoration. And Yahweh said to Satan, "See, he is in your hand, only spare his life." Satan operates at the sovereign behest and permission and allowance. He is a controlled creature. He is a created creature. He cannot go above the limitations and parameters that God ascribes, but if you do give him an inch, he will take a mile, so he's still causing much, much damage, but he is saying keep him alive, because if he's, he has to be alive in order to curse me to his face. If you take the life, then, he's not going to be alive to settle our bet. So you can do whatever you want with him now. You've already taken so much. I trust my servant Job so much that I will allow you to go the extra mile with my faith, that his faith will remain intact. So it is an act of tremendous trust from God to allow Satan to afflict his servant Job to the extremities that he did. And Satan went from the presence of Yahweh and smote Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Head to toe, he's covered with painful, ugly skin boils, and he's eventually scraping them with the shard remnants of pottery. So there would have been a lot of accumulated pus. The nature of this illness, he was sleepless, his breath stank. We do read of the physical symptoms in greater details in the poetic discourses. But loathsome sores, loathsome to look at, loathsome to have, loathsome to feel, painful and ugly and unpleasant. And they're all over the place. There's not an inch on his body that is not covered with them. The all-encompassing extent is indicated by the range from the sole of his foot. The sole is the bottom of your foot to the crown of your head. So these things are literally all over him, top to bottom. And he took a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. He is at home in the ashes, and he's, so profoundly painful and prolific are the accumulated pus from these skin boils that he's using, the sharp, rugged, jagged object of fragments of pottery to scrape them, just to give himself some measure of relief, just to get, they must have itched like heck, and he really went to town with them, and he's in the midst of ashes. He's surrounding himself in ashes. This is what contrite and repentant people do. And the word, he repents in the dust and ashes in response to Yahweh's two discourses in the 38th and 39th chapter. That's the fourth one. And then the 40th and the 41st chapter is his second discourse. And his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse Elohim and die." His wife is left alive, so he did lose all his children, and without the wife, he couldn't have had as many children as he did. And Satan is using her as he used Eve to tempt Adam. So she is in effect Satan's mouthpiece at this point. He's saying, you still hold fast to, the very integrity that God, unbeknownst to them, is praising and exalting and pointing to pride with in the company of Satan and all the angels. He's saying, get rid of it. What use is your integrity now? Curse Elohim and die. So she implores him to do two things, the first of which Job adamantly refuses once more again, but he is very much agreement. In the third chapter, the first of the discourses, Job expresses a wish for death. He considers his life not worth living. He would rather not have been born. So he is in agreement with the latter, but vehemently, in certain terms of certain conviction, refuses to indulge her first request to curse Elohim. This is something that Job will not do. He is an upright man, and he eschews evil, and there is no greater evil than blasphemy, and that's something Job's not going to do, no matter what you send him. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speak. Indeed, should we accept good from Elohim and not accept evil? In all this Job did not sin with his lips." He's characterizing her speech as foolish. It would be a foolish thing to do, to blaspheme, because self-evidently you invite curses on yourself. So why he's chiding her for her lack of any valid counsel here. But, the serenity prayer is to accept the things we cannot change. Job could not change. His children were gone. His sheep were gone, his oxen were gone, his camels were gone, every item of agriculture he got, and now his health was gone. So he was accepting the evil with the same grace and dignity and integrity as he did, accepting the good but it would be an oversimplification that he is not a man in pain, because what launches in the discourses after this, Job is very much, he could be described as a perfect man in the sinless sense in the first two chapters, but he does, even though Job did not suffer because he sinned in his suffering, as he reveals through this. But he did not sin with his lips, not yet, but eventually he does succumb to the sin of self-righteousness. They're few and far between, but they are there in the range of which we read of Job's monologues. And three of the friends of Job heard all the evil that came on him, and each one came to his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. And they met together to come to sympathize with him and to comfort him. The news would have spread, the grapevine would have reached these people from disparate locations. Something like this does not just happen to anybody anywhere all the time. This is not a normal, ordinary procedure of events. So the word each reaches their ears, and we do hear from these men we meet that we learn of their theology in greater detail. But Eliphaz is the senior-most member. Temanite, he would have been an Edomite. The city of Utz corresponds with what became Edomite territory, as does Teman. Teman was a grandson of Esau, and the town of Temanite was renowned for their wisdom, according to Jeremiah 49:7 and perhaps Obadiah 1:8. So these three men were like Job. They were men of prestige and influence and renowned for their wisdom and piety and righteousness. And the Shuhite, now Abraham, one of the youngest born of the concubine through whom the Midianite nation was born, was named Shuhite. Naamanite appears twice as a name of females in the Old Testament, but other than that, there's no reference to where that is. But these are not Hebrew people. But what's really misleading here is to sympathize him and to comfort him. Maybe they did in the first 7 days when they sat in sun's silence, but once the discourses unleash and are out in the open, they are less than sympathetic to his situation. They are so adamantly offended. Now, these men all have their own minds, own individuality, own personalities, but they do approach Job's situation from the same simplistic theological prism, the black and white prism, which suggests that suffering is proportion to sin, when Job's experience so clearly invalidates the premise of their suggestion, and they are misleadingly named as comforted. That's what they came to do, but they ended up failing in the end. They did not offer counsel that comforted. They were not sympathetic. They were not empathetic. They were more concerned with defending their own theology than they were with getting to the root of the matter of Job's suffering. And they lifted up their eyes from a distance and did not recognize him, and they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on the head towards the heavens. He's so, to be covered head to toe with skin boils is to render oneself unrecognizable, the man they once knew. It took them a while they could not instantly gauge that it was Job. They walked right by him, but then their friend, these men were his friends, even though the discourse that develops, they are less than friendly. They were fair weather friends, and they came, to mourn with him, and they did the same thing. Job tore his robe in obeisance and shaved his head, and sprinkling dust on the heads. Dust is the reality of repentance, and contrition is embedded in the sprinkling of dust. And they've got their heads toward the heaven where it matters most, because heaven is where the answer can only come. Then they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word for him, for they saw that the pain was very great. Week-long was the customary length of time that mourning was for funerals, so this man was as good as dead, given the duration of the time they sat in sun silence. They were speechless. There was nothing they could say to such a situation. Although after that week long, they do accumulate thoughts and have all these pent up words. And it's just imagine not speaking at all for an entire week. You would have rivers of torrents of words coming out of them. But for this moment,